I'd crossed over into a different dimension.
Mm-hmm.
There was a different, whole different reality than what I was in on that
Right.
hospital bed.
Yep.
And it was in that reality, I was connected to everything.
Mm.
Like everything was a part of me, like all of life, all that existed was a part of me. In that reality, there was this immense feeling of well-being,
Mm.
like this immense feeling that all is well, all is well, all is well. And when I began to have these feelings, I began to sense this presence come up
Yeah.
to me. And it was this very grand presence, like this bigger than anything I had ever experienced presence. And at the same time, when this presence came and kind of engulfed me, I realized it was me. It was me. And it was like,
Mm.
it was the me that wasn't ashamed and neurotic, but it was what people probably would call your higher self. It was like
Yes.
that.
Essence. Yeah.
And there was a conversation that happened
Mm.
when I began to merge with this presence. And it said to me a few things very clearly. And it said to me that I know a lot about trying to force life to be good to me
Mm.
and trying to make it be good to me. But I don't know shit about how to let it. And it did say shit, by the way.
Sure.
Um, I don't know anything about how to let it be good to me.
Right.
And that it wants to be good to me. That's all it wants to do.
Hello, everyone. It's Irene Lyon here, and I have a new interview for you to listen to. If you're watching this on my YouTube channel, you can watch. It is with my new friend, Jerome Braggs, and I met him earlier this year. I'm dating this. It is the year 2020, and I am thrilled to share this with you. Jerome has a lot of important messages around healing and thriving, and we talk about so many pieces. And I'm going to read a very short portion of his About Me on his website. And of course, all his information we will put near this interview. So he writes, on January 1st, 2004, I checked into the hospital with what I thought was the flu, but ended up diagnosed instead with pneumonia, anemia, pancreatitis, giardia, a fluid-packed lung, kidney failure, and AIDS. Then doctors gave me 7 days to live. 7 days to live. So this was in 2004. We're now in 2020. Clearly, that 7 days to live was not accurate. So we talk about this journey. We talk about why he knows he got sick, how he healed, how he got sick again, and then how he fully healed and is living a very vital, empowered, healthy, and just joyful life. We talk about so many interesting things. We get into topics like medical hexing and trauma and being true to ourselves and what it means to be really authentic and heal from the inside out. So enjoy this interview with Jerome Braggs.
All right. Hey, Jerome. Welcome.
Hey, thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. I want to just dive right in to your story because it is an important story, and I think the wisdom and the teachings that you offer your people and of course the world are incredibly important. Hence why I wanted to talk to you and invite you. And one of the first questions I want to ask is about your near-death experience and that moment in life. And I want to jump around a little bit, but if we just start with that, the big one, that's
Okay.
that story. Not that all stories aren't big. Tell me about that and the first moment when you realize, oh, something's not good here.
Okay. Do you want the first one or you want the
Yeah,
second one?
let's go full.
Okay. So
Please.
I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I had just kind of graduated from college, was working my first professional job.
Yeah.
And I had been kind of fever, not feeling well,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And I thought, I was doing all the things that I knew how to do at the time to try to get myself well. I made the soups, I had rested, and all that type of stuff. And
Yeah.
I wasn't getting better.
Uh-huh.
And I had called my mom to, my mother's a physician. And
Okay.
so I had called her to try and get something prescribed so that
Right.
I could take some medicine and I can go back to work, because it was coming up on the time. This was during, we were on Christmas break
Right.
from my
And
job.
what
And
year
we
was
were,
this from?
yeah, this was 2000. So this was December 2003, at the end of December. And so, but she couldn't she couldn't prescribe me anything, because as a physician in the United States, you can't prescribe over states.
Out of state. Got it.
So she was from out of town. And so she said, you just need to go to the emergency room
Mm.
and get seen and get some medicine so you can get better, so you can go back to work the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because we're both kind of thinking this may be the flu.
What were the symptoms?
So I had a fever.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot of fatigue.
Yeah.
And the thing I noticed when I decided to finally call my mother is that my feet were swelling.
Wow.
And but they had just just noticed it that day. But for weeks, well, not for weeks, but for at least about a week, I had fever and fatigue,
Mm-hmm.
and just wasn't feeling well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went into the doctor and went to the emergency room
Mm-hmm.
and spoke with the doctor. I was like, I think I had the flu. Can you just run some tests and give me some medicine so I can go home?
Yeah.
And she ran a test with me. She said, okay, let's run some tests and see.
Mm-hmm.
And she looked at everything that was going on, and then she ran some tests, and she left. She said, it's going to take a bit before we get the test back.
Yeah.
But just be as comfortable as you can. And by this time the pain was escalating. Like I was more in pain. I wasn't just having fatigue, I was in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And when she came back, instead of just being by herself, she had a team of doctors.
Uh-oh.
And she also had the telephone in her hand. And she said, you have a call. I want you to take the call first.
Huh.
And so she hands me the phone, and on the phone is my mother. And she says, and all I can remember that she said was, hold on, I'll be there in the morning.
Mm.
And then she hung up. And I had this feeling then that this is more than the flu.
Mm-hmm.
And after I hung up the phone, the doctor and the team of doctors surrounded my bed, and they said, son, you don't have the flu. You have kidney failure, pancreatitis, anemia, a fluid-packed lung, a parasite in your stomach. And if all of that wasn't delicious enough already, they also said I had AIDS. And then she told me, from what it looks like, from everything that it looks like and the progression of everything, it looks like you have about 7 days to live.
7 days.
I have about 7 days to live. And so we're going to try to do everything we can, but it's probably best you start to try and get your affairs in order.
Wow.
And then they left the little hospital room. And
were you in a solo room, Jerome?
I wasn't in there by myself.
Okay.
And I was 24 at the time.
Wow.
And when they left the hospital room, I began to, I just had this shock awareness of like, wait, this isn't something that I'm just going to get up and go home from today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, I'm dying. And I had this moment as I began to realize that I was dying. So many people now over the years who are have been given terminal diagnosis or who have been on their deathbeds.
Yeah.
And I know this now from doing this work, it's a similar experience we all have. It's kind of these questions you ask yourself when you're dying.
Yep.
and it came through kind of a life review. So like my
Yeah.
entire life began to flash over my eyes, and there were some questions I began to ask as my life was flashing, and they were, was I happy with this life that I had lived?
Mm.
Had I ever really truly been myself in my life?
Mhm.
Did I ever really did I feel good about myself in my life? Had I really deposited the reason why I came here? Like,
Right.
was the purpose, what some people may call your purpose?
This. Yep.
And then, like, did the people in my life really, um, had I ever really let the people in my life know how I really felt?
Right.
And as I began having this review, um, and I want to say this too, I wasn't afraid. This is something I really wanted to make very
Yeah.
clear with people when they ask me, because at this time of my, I was on this, I had already began a spiritual journey of understanding that I was a soul having a human experience. And with that understanding came a deep knowing that death was not an end for me. So although I wasn't
Yeah.
completely sure of what that was, I knew it wasn't an end. So I wasn't afraid of death, but I was going through my life really having these questions were like very strongly begging to be answered.
Yes.
And so as I was looking at all of this, I realized that wasn't happy with my life.
Mm.
There were many things I was doing that weren't nourishing for me.
Mhm.
Um, there was a lot of things I wanted to do that I wasn't doing. Um, I wasn't really following my dreams. There were things
Yeah.
I really wanted to do with my life and express how I wanted to express in the world that I wasn't expressing. And I hadn't really ever truly been myself. There was a
Mhm.
lot of aspects about myself that I was
Mhm.
suppressing, and I was hiding
Mhm.
pieces of my sexuality, pieces of my intuitive gifts, and
Yes.
that I was hiding as well. Um, and just aspects of what I really wanted to do and how I really wanted to be in the world that I wasn't allowing to really come forth. And I realized how much like shame I had around myself, and that I didn't really ever just I never really felt like I had seated in my body. That's kind of
Mhm.
what it felt like. Like I didn't ever feel like I was seated in the center of my body. And I didn't feel like I had really deposited my purpose here. Like there was things there were callings that I knew that
You
um,
knew.
I knew
Yeah.
and I was aware of, and I wasn't honoring.
I have a question because
Yes.
you took when just before you said at that point you knew of soul, you had a spiritual path. So my question was, had you ever questioned your purpose and your soul's work before that moment in the hospital, or did that just flood through, boom, in that moment?
Yeah, I thought I was here on the planet at the time. Well, I'll tell you what one of the callings was that I realized that I wasn't honoring. I knew, I had a very deep knowing early on that I was going to be here. I was here somehow to teach spirituality and
Yeah.
healing. But I thought that was going to happen
Later.
when I was 50 and after I had won my Grammys and after I had won my Oscars, because I thought I was supposed to be, my purpose was to be a famous singer and an actor.
Oh,
And I wasn't
okay.
doing any of that either.
Right.
So
That was just
it,
this idea that hadn't happened yet.
right, it
Okay.
was so although the teaching and the speaking of healing was a strong pull,
Mm.
I wasn't really honoring that. And then also I wasn't honoring this other desire of really wanting I wasn't doing any of that.
Got
Right.
it.
And then I also hadn't really let people in my life know how I really felt about them. I had a hard time expressing my feelings for
Mm.
someone, my affection and adoration for anyone, even if it wasn't like a sexual thing, even if like my parents or my
Right.
friends,
Yeah.
I just wasn't doing that. And so I wasn't scared again, I want to go back. I wasn't scared of
Yeah.
dying, but what I had realized that, and this is where the horror actually began to set in. Although I wasn't scared of dying,
Mm.
when I began to realize that my answer to all those questions was no, I began to be horrified, because what I realized was I was about to die not having ever truly lived.
Mm.
And that these aspects were what made life.
Yeah.
Being happy with my life, living living the meaning that I felt like I was here for, um, being my real self,
Mm-hmm.
letting people know how to, like, sharing my heart with others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I began to be filled with these regrets,
Yeah.
because I realized I wasn't going to get another chance
This is
to
it.
do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And what a waste. And that was it was like, what a waste of this life.
Mm.
And so I made a decision in that moment that I wasn't going to die. I wasn't, I, that I didn't, I
You did.
knew at the time that I
Yeah.
believed again that I was a soul. And another part of my understanding at that time was that I create what my experience of reality is.
Yes.
And at the time, my 24-year-old self was using that knowing to
Mm-hmm.
get a date on Friday night, or to find $5 when I didn't have money to eat, or to get a
Right.
parking space in front of the mall when I was
Right.
running late to the movies, right?
Right. Right.
And that was what I thought creation was. But I knew then, if this was true, if it was really true at a very deep level, and if I was believing this was true, and if I was really going to believe it, then it was going to have to be true for me now. And it's going to have to be true for a miracle.
Yes.
And so I threw everything I knew
Yeah.
at the situation, everything in the kitchen sink that I'd ever heard about reality or consciousness or healing.
Feeling.
I threw it all over the place. I was doing affirmations. I was doing visualizations. I had a positivity bubble. Like, you couldn't, if you couldn't stand within 6 feet of it. So the doctors couldn't come within 6 feet of me and tell me anything that was going to be what I termed at the time negative. So that what negative meant to me was like, you're not going to make it. Or so if you had something to say like that, you had to say it 6 feet away from me.
Got it. Did you stay in the hospital just so that if they said there's only 6 or 7 days, in that moment, what does a physician say? Do they say, go crazy, live your life? Or like, how do they deal with that?
They said, we're going to try everything.
Okay.
So I had to stay in the hospital. And one of the things that happened was they put me on dialysis there. So all of these things were happening while I was so I was in the hospital for a month.
Okay.
And so, but even after the 7 days passed, it was still this, okay, so you have 7 days, but we may think you just have another week, or we may think you just have 2 weeks, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was doing all of these things. And as every week passed that I was still here, I had this belief that this was working, was working. I was doing the diet and doing everything that I knew at the time. Now, this is before YouTube, and this is before all that. So this is like whatever cassette tape I had, or whatever,
your Walkman.
Right, whatever book I had, I had a complete Walkman, and I would listen. As a matter of fact, it's funny, Walkman, I would listen to tapes on my Walkman during my dialysis treatments in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
That would tell me, like, I think one of the ones that I was listening to was I Choose Life.
Sure.
So that was something that I was, I choose life, trying to get myself. And so I did all of that, and I did, and it was basically what I was doing at the time was coming from this understanding and putting everything, my focus was on the law of attraction at the time, like manifesting wellness in my body.
Yeah.
And so I was in the hospital for a month. They released me after a month. And 2 months after that, 2 months after I was at home, my body fully healed.
Wow.
My kidneys were back to fully functioning. They couldn't find HIV or AIDS. All the other diseases were from my body. And I was being called a medical miracle. And the doctors were just like, we don't understand, but we're here for it. And I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I knew what well-being took. I thought I knew what healing was about. And I was going about my regular life again.
Uh-huh.
And I had that belief that I had it all figured out
Yeah.
until I found myself back in that hospital a year and a half later.
Later. So I have a question to that. So you
Yeah.
left a month or 6 weeks or so after your miracle. So the two questions: one, did the doctors ever ask you what you were doing around the affirmations and the positivity? No.
The
Okay.
only thing they asked me about,
Yeah.
and it was because I brought it to them,
Yeah.
because they asked me, I think there's a question like, what medications were you taking? At that time, I wasn't on any medications. And I started to take, and you had to, especially with the HIV medications, they wanted to know everything you were taking, whatever supplements, to make sure it wasn't combating them.
Yeah.
And so I had begun to do an herbal treatment. And
Yeah.
so I was talking to them about that. And I was adamant about, like, I'm taking these things, even if you don't believe in them. And even
Yeah.
if you feel they're not right, which at the time, this also was before any type of herbal supplements was even
On the
like
mainstream.
was mainstream at all. This was when any of that was viewed as like witchcraft by the medical
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
And so they were like, and they had this stance of absolutely not, but also I was very empowered around that with them. I was
Yeah.
like, this is not a discussion that we're going to have. You may just say this combats this medicine and we need to figure out what we need to do with that. But I'm doing this. But other than that, they never asked me
They didn't ask.
what, oh, there was one thing but they did know about. But they never asked me about it, because one of the things I did was the social worker at the hospital, no, she was a social worker for the dialysis center in the hospital.
Sure.
She had in her office this diagram of this 3D diagram thing of healthy kidneys.
Mm,
And I asked, could I have that?
good for you.
And
Yeah.
and she was like, what are you going to do with it? I said, I'm going to sit it on my bed, in my bedroom, and I'm going to look at it, or in
Yeah.
my hospital room, and I'm going to look at it every day, and those are going to be my kidneys. And that was the only thing outside of that they knew, but they never asked me. They didn't ask me one time.
Interesting. So fascinating. It's reminding me of, did you ever read the book Spontaneous Healing by Andrew Weil?
Mm-hmm.
That was the first book I ever read. It would have been in like 97 maybe, because I was having some skin troubles with my body, and it was a long story. We can get into that another time. But in it, and I reread a part just 2 nights ago in the bath, and it was the chapter on medical hexing. And so what that is where, I mean, back in the day, it was like voodoo death, where a spell was cast on a person and they would die very quickly. But Dr. Weil in the book was talking about what occurs when a diagnosis is given and the person just accepts that as truth.
It is the current day.
Yeah.
It is the current day. It is the current day curse.
It is.
It's the current day curse. We don't ever speak about it like that.
It's so.
But it goes right in the subconscious, because that's
Yep.
what a curse really is. Even in indigenous cultures,
Yes.
what it really is when when it really takes hold to a person is when they hear that a person's cursed them. That's when all the stuff really starts to happen.
Got it.
It's because it goes into your subconscious and it takes it in as, this is true for me.
Yes.
And because we hold doctors up with such authority,
high regard,
and such high regard, what they say we take in immediately as truth. So
yes.
if they say,
you're going to die,
I'm going to die, this is true for me,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's one of the major things that I know from the first time, mm-hmm. that was key to my healing, because I did not take that in whatsoever. I didn't care at all what they said. It was, mm-hmm. It was just like it was almost like when you hear a small child talking about something, describing something that you may know, like how the TV works, mm-hmm. and they're talking about it, and they may say, yeah, the little elves get back there and da, 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 da. and you know that's not real at all, but you entertain it,
Of
and you're
course.
just like, uh-huh. Oh
Yeah.
yes, that's exact when the doctors would talk to me the first time in the hospital about like, you know, you're going to be on dialysis for the rest of your life, even if you survive this, and da, 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 da. I'd be like, oh,
Mm,
okay, mm-hmm,
yeah.
okay,
You're not letting it's cognitive.
right. It stayed in the external cognitive realm. It didn't get in. I didn't allow it. I had a filter at that
Yes.
time that didn't
So
allow it in
good.
any other parts of my consciousness. Um, but that was all different the second time. So
Yeah. So that was actually, and I want to get to the second story, and before I forget, the other question, the medical hexing just kind of slipped into my own brain there.
yeah.
Is so you thought that you had figured it out after this first experience. Did you go back to your job in life and stop those self-care nurturing practices, or did you continue,
Ooh.
you
Okay,
know?
so I don't know if I've ever shared this with anyone, and this has
Okay.
been with 15 years. So you'll be the first person that will probably hear this
Okay.
because I remember the moment. I can remember the moment when because it was a feeling
Yeah.
that is undescribable, really, with words. But I remember the moment where I knew my body was getting sick, when I
Tell
knew I
me.
was back in the same
Yeah.
place, and
Yeah.
and I felt it, and I had a energy feeling of it first, and then I began to have a physical feeling of it right after that, and I had been it's funny, I have never told anybody this story.
It's
So I had so I was healed. My parents had gone back home. I was living my life, and I had been chosen for this modeling contest to be the model that was going to be the cover of this famous author's book,
okay.
next book.
Wow.
And so she had this, which was a dream,
Hmm.
by the way, with the person who grew up with a lot of shame around his body,
Hmm.
to now be this was a dream, right?
Right.
And so I went to this. There's this contest that she had around it, and the author's name, for some people who might know it, was Zane, and she writes a lot of romantic books and things like that. But her name is Zane,
Okay.
and she was having this. It was this whole contest around it where it was like a 3-day thing
Mm.
where first you would see the models, there'd be interviews, there'd be this all this stuff with them, and we had posters and all that and pictures taken,
Wow.
and then you would have this kind of swimsuit whatever. And so I went to the first kind of meeting with all of us where we had our pictures taken, we took the poster picture and all of that, and I began to see all these guys around, and they had these musty 6-packs and all of that. And you know, I was fresh, and I had a few scars now from my experience with being in the hospital and surgeries I had to have for dialysis purposes and things.
Mm-hmm.
And although I was slimmer than I was because I had lost weight during this process, I wasn't like muscled up like
Sure.
them. And I began to feel ashamed.
Mm.
And the same shame I have had all of my life
Right.
before then around my body, about because I grew up being teased as a bit. I was a thicker kid, and so I
Uh-huh.
grew up being teased and made to believe that my body, as it was, as a
Wasn't.
thick body, wasn't desirable, wasn't enough, didn't belong.
Got it.
And so I felt that same shame come on me.
Mm-hmm.
And within uh, 5 minutes of this shame, and I was in this room, and they were talking about it, and it really came on when they told us, you know, there's a swimsuit portion, and
Ah,
it's going to be this really sexy thing that they're going to do. And I got so afraid of people seeing my body. And this was, again, I had this,
yeah. Fear.
and I got so afraid. And I remember coming home, and the contest was, and you were going to get money and all this just for participating. And I remember the contest was the very next, I had come home and I was thinking about this, and the contest, we were supposed to go back the next day to have this contest. And I made the decision I wasn't going to go.
Mm. You shut yourself.
And when I made that decision that I wasn't going to go,
Mm-hmm.
from this shame, I started to feel my body itch. And this was a thing that would happen sometimes with the dialysis, right? But I didn't know then, because I didn't really have the itching during that time, but I had it this second time. But my body began to itch right then.
Yep.
And it was several months after that before, but in that moment, that was when it started again.
Got it.
And so I knew I had this feeling, and I didn't know how to get out of it, but I knew I just had, and it was annoying in my body. I'm making myself sick.
It was like a hidden layer that was maybe there already, and it hadn't been fully addressed, healed, looked at, worked with, that shame piece.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Which we can get into later, because that becomes a big awareness later in my journey. But that was this, I'm able to look back, and because I can remember it like it was yesterday, because there was no itching before. And it didn't stop after, that's when it began, in that very moment.
Okay. So you started to itch. And you didn't go back to the contest?
I did not go back to the contest. I didn't even tell them I just ghosted them.
Got it.
And again, so the big fear was the swimsuit part.
Sure.
Because I wasn't perfect. Right. And so then a few months after that, I got really ill again, and I was trying so hard not to go to the hospital, because I just knew in my head what it was going to be. And I just got to a point where I couldn't resist. I just had to go.
Right.
And went back to the hospital. And when I went into the emergency room this time, and they ran the tests and everything, I had the exact same diagnosis, all of those things.
Amazing.
To the T, even to the T cell count, the same T cell count as the beginning.
Oh, wild.
And instead of 7 days to live this time, I have 48 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. And the doctors were rushing, because they were like, we're going to do this immediate surgery on you in an hour to try and save your life, because you may go faster than that if we don't.
Right.
And so when they left to try and make sure the surgeons could get the rooms together and everything, I was in the hospital room. They had called my parents. My parents were jumping on a plane right then and there, because this may be the last moments, right? And I knew on my deathbed at this time, I didn't have that same type of life review. Instead of that life review, I had questions, because I knew there was a knowing in my gut that if I was back here with the exact same diagnosis, like this was not common at all, that people had this kind of combination of things. They never really seen all of that together. If they had this combination and it was at the exact same level as it was the first time, this wasn't a coincidence, it was a message. And I had a gut feeling this was a message from my soul to me, and that I needed to listen. My soul was trying to communicate to me through my body, and I needed to listen. And so I had questions. My first question was, what was the message? What's the message here that you're trying to get me to hear, that I have obviously been trying so hard not to pay attention to? What is this now for me to pay attention to? And then the second one was, I wanted to know what it really took to heal and to live well. Now, the word I didn't have at the time was well-being, but that's really what the feeling was.
Right.
I wanted to know what it really took to heal myself. I wanted to know at a deep core level. And I was like, I'm here. Like, I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have anything else. I'm like, use whatever you can to speak. And I'm just going to lay here on the bed and just listen.
Listen and let it happen.
And let it happen. And that's when I had that's when what I had, what many people will call a near-death experience. I don't fully call it that because there was no one in the room with me to verify that I actually died.
Sure.
But what I do know is that I crossed over into a different dimension.
Mm-hmm.
There was a different, um, whole different reality than what I was in on that
Right.
hospital bed.
Yep.
And it was in that reality, I was connected to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything was a part of me. Like all of life, all that existed was a part of me.
Mm-hmm.
In that reality, there was this immense feeling of well-being.
Mm.
Like this immense feeling that all is well, all is well, all is well. And when I began to have these feelings, I began to sense this presence come up
Yeah.
to me. And it was this very grand presence, like this bigger than anything I had ever experienced presence. And at the same time, when this presence came and kind of engulfed me, I realized it was me. It was me. And it was like,
Mm.
it was the me that wasn't ashamed and neurotic, but it was what people probably would call your higher self. It was like
Yes.
that.
Essence. Yeah.
And there was a conversation that happened
Mm.
when I began to merge with this presence. And it said to me a few things very clearly. And it said to me that I know a lot about trying to force life to be good to me
Mm.
and trying to make it be good to me. But I don't know shit about how to let it. And it did say shit, by the way.
Sure.
I don't know anything about how to let it be good to me.
Right.
And that it wants to be good to me. That's all it wants to do. And I that I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to learn. And then also that the key that I was seeking to healing, that I'd answered, the solution or the answer to the question I have been asking around what it takes to really heal and to really live a life of well-being, like not just a life where I was surviving, but one that I was thriving, was to love myself.
Mm-hmm.
That loving myself was the answer to it all. And again, I didn't know anything about that, but I was going to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of one of the last pieces of the conversation. There were other pieces, but this was the big piece of it.
Big chunks.
And then I was back. I came out of that dimension and I was back in my body. And as I was centered in my body, I knew I was back in this dimension, in this space. There was this download that happened, like I guess the last piece of this interaction,
Mm-hmm.
where I just had this deep knowing that flooded every cell of my body that I was going to be asked to travel this, that the key was to love myself. And that if I said yes, I was going to be asked to travel this journey very deeply. And that I was going to be asked to and invited to teach the world what I learned at some point. That was going to be part of my big thing for being here.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was the big wake up call moment,
Yeah.
right? I had been given almost the red or the blue pill moment, right?
Yes.
If I take the red pill, I'm going to stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't say yes to this journey of loving myself, because there was also this knowing in this, by the way, like it wasn't all this. For a lot of people's near-death experiences, they're in a feeling of bliss comes over them afterwards and all this. I was a little bit in terror, because what was being asked of me, I had a knowing in my body that it was going to change everything about me. And I didn't know where it was going to change me to.
Yeah. It was a huge unknown, right?
No, it was a huge unknown. And the big unknown, which is the unknown we all get scared, which scares us so much about the unknown, is I didn't know if this unknown was going to be better than what I was leaving.
Right.
Going to be asked to leave behind, right? I didn't have any way of knowing that.
Yeah.
And so I was horrified, because I knew that a part of me, I was going to have to die in a way.
Yeah.
I may not have to die physically, but there was a death being asked of me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so it was this moment, like,
Yeah.
you take this pill and you can stay alive
Yeah.
as you know it,
As you know it.
or you take this pill and you die to what you know it, but you do know that this is the path to healing.
Mm-hmm.
And this over here, you may think it's the path, but obviously it's not, because here we are.
Again. Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, I don't want to physically die,
Yeah.
and I don't want to physically stay sick forever. So
No.
I'm going to take this pill. I'm going
Yeah.
to make my life be about taking this blue pill.
Red pill.
The red pill was the same.
Okay.
I know in the movie, I think in the movie the red
Ah,
pill is but
that
I
you
switched to that.
shifted it.
I shifted it a bit.
That's totally fine.
Right. So the pill that was going to change everything for me was the one I took.
Got it.
And so I dedicated my life to that. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, you know, I'm yours, love. I'm yours.
Mm-hmm.
Teach me everything.
Mm.
And I don't want to live. I want to live the well and delicious life I really crave.
Yeah.
That's what I want. And so whatever I need to know for that to happen, let it be so. Now, what I didn't know was that was going to take me like 15 years.
They didn't give you a timeline, hey?
Yeah, there was no timeline on that. And I didn't know, how stubborn, how deeply engraved unloving myself had been.
Mm-hmm.
And how deeply engraved it is in like, I didn't know all the pieces of that I was going to have to excavate.
Yeah.
A lot of things, not just in myself, but in my culture and all of this type of stuff. I was going to have to look at all these areas. I don't think it takes people as long as it has taken me, but I know that I was here to take the deepest dive into it, because I was here to help people collapse the curve.
Yes. Oh, I love what you just said there.
Yeah. And I didn't, let's be clear. I
Yeah.
didn't have that awareness in the beginning. Like, my journey there was a lot of, why is this taking so damn long?
Mm-hmm.
What is this? I'm ready to give up on this. But I really know now that I had to learn it in such a depth, because I had to teach it.
Yeah.
So if I was going to teach it, I needed to know it in my bones, what I was talking about. As with all things that we teach, like your greatest medicine that you offer to people is what's in your bones.
Yeah.
And it's in my bones now. But that journey of learning what loving myself really is and what it really takes transformed my entire life. Like, every single area of my life changed for the better and became healthy and became delicious.
Mm-hmm.
And my health miraculously just get better and better and better and better and better. And I learned also that was actually the key, that our health is directly related to how we're loving ourselves.
Yep.
It's directly. And that the diseases weren't these coincidences or these punishments, that they were directly correlated.
Mm-hmm.
They were reflections of how I had been starving myself of love. Because that was one of the big things that I learned, was that the body was created by the soul to house the energy of itself. And so when the body is not holding the energy of the soul anywhere, it doesn't have the very energy it needs to be healthy.
To be well.
Like the gaslight, to say, you're running really low on the fuel we need to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And when I began to learn how to fuel myself, that was what my journey was about, learning how to fuel myself with love, in all the ways that I was depleting myself of it. That's when I began to really heal. And that's when my life really began to heal as well, and began to turn itself into well-being.
and your soul's purpose, if we were
And my
to.
soul's purpose on this planet,
Exactly.
right?
Question. So I want to get into, I actually want to ask you about how we manifest these illnesses in our body. Because I think I heard you say something like that in another talk I was listening to. So hold that one in our thoughts. So when you had that moment of being with source, being with you, your source, oneness, everything in that hospital bed, what was the timeline? Because clearly you lived more than 48 hours. How did that unravel into you leaving and being like, okay, this is it. This is my journey.
Yeah. So, oh, I may have said probably that experience. So that experience felt like forever to me.
I,
This
I,
is the
I
thing
believe
about,
you.
like, in that dimension, it felt like it was this conversation that was happening over lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was only God, it
Because it
might have been,
was most
it might have
likely.
been like 5 minutes,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
right? Like, in when I came back in time, um, I had a surgery after, like, within that day, that night or something, and then
Mm-hmm.
they put me on dialysis, and I had a dialysis treatment that night,
Sure.
and I probably had a few more dialysis treatments the next few days,
Yeah.
um, and then I had a blood transfusion. I had forgotten about that. I had a blood for transfusion. I had a blood transfusion.
Okay.
Um, and so I was in the hospital this time, probably a week and a
Okay.
half, 2 weeks, and then I was sitting back home, and they said it looks like you may be able to make it, but you'll be on dialysis for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And um, the time, yeah, it took me. It was years. Like, there were some things that healed and got better
Yeah.
as things, but then there were plateaus that were happening.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I learned and the more I uncovered, um, which was really which is really one of the pieces that really changed that collapsed the curve down to a faster pace,
Sure.
and made the plateaus be larger jumps in my healing journey, was when I began to understand trauma
Got it.
and what my trauma had been, and how that trauma had was one of the causes of me starving myself of love.
Yes.
And so that didn't come. That was a few years down the road,
Yeah.
because one of the first things that I began to do, which why my healing journey took so long, is, I had been conditioned, even in the spirituality and the metaphysical worlds. There's this major um, messaging that healing is really about the external things we do.
Right.
It's about the diet you're doing, how much green juice you're doing, how alkaline your body
The
is. Are you
behaviors.
vegan or not?
Yeah.
Take this. You need to do this therapy and this method and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And while those things can be helpful,
Mm-hmm.
the root cause of illness is your disconnection from love.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't have to do with that green juice at all. And that doesn't have to do with how many times you sit out in the sun and put your feet in the earth. That had to do with, like, the thoughts that I had, the story I was telling myself about myself,
Mm-hmm.
and the behaviors and the lifestyle that story had created around me to support itself.
Tell me about
And
that.
yeah,
So
so
that this comes into that piece of trauma and, just as you mentioned, the pieces from long ago in your life that just didn't give you that unconditional goodness,
yeah, so
right?
this is something that I learned a part of what happened in my healing journey is my intuitive gifts began to, and they played a huge role in my healing, because I was able to see other people's energy, to read it, and I began to work with a lot of people that were also dealing with illnesses, and I was seeing where, wait a minute, there's this thing stuck in your energy field, and it has to do with something that happened to you when you were 7, or this belief system that you have around this thing. And so I began to see this thing, and I didn't have the words trauma with it yet.
Sure.
But it was this event that happened.
Mhm.
And what I could see was, from the soul's perspective, it wasn't the event that happened. It was what that event made that person feel about themselves and believe about themselves
Yeah.
and life
Yeah.
and life around them.
Yes.
And it was this belief that had disconnected them from the true energy of themselves. And so as I began to work with people, other people, I began to see, okay, where is this in me? Right?
Yeah.
How does this relate to me? And what I began to realize was there were a few, and so the event was the traumatizing event.
Hmm.
But the real trauma, the wound or the injury, I like to call it, was the belief in the feeling that wasn't disconnected to the truth of myself.
100%.
And so what I had learned was, for me growing up, one of the things was I was teased a lot
Hmm.
around my body.
Body. Hmm.
And so what that made me feel was there was something wrong with me and that I'm not enough.
Hmm.
I'm not attractive and I'm not desirable as I am.
Hmm.
And there were a lot of different behaviors that would come around that, right? There was hiding that I
Yeah.
did. Like, for example, I didn't wear shorts. Oh God, I hardly ever wear shorts, right? Because I didn't want you
Wow.
to see my legs. I was the guy
Right.
that would never take his shirt off at
Oh,
the pool. I was, never felt. I always felt, and this is how I would say, is like I always felt attractive enough to attract the type of person that I wanted,
hmm.
but I never felt attractive enough to keep them.
Uh-huh. Not worth
N-
deserving.
Not deserving enough, right? So my looks weren't enough to really keep somebody's attention. They
Mhm.
could get it, but they couldn't keep it.
Right.
And so, my relationships would be these madly beautiful affairs for two
Mhm.
weeks, and then the person would disappear,
Right.
right? And so, what I had to look at was how I was viewing myself, and how I had been taught with that to view myself was not, my body particularly, was not from a space of love and cherishment.
Mhm.
Like I didn't appreciate it, I didn't accept it, I didn't adore it.
Mhm.
It was always something I was running from, I was rejecting, I was trying to suppress and hide. And so loving myself was learning how to do the opposite of that,
Yeah.
right? Because that's really what healing is about, embodying the opposite energy of
Yeah.
what's the illness is. And so
Mhm.
the illness was the shame I had around my body. And
Mhm.
so the opposite of the shame was the love and appreciation, was really appreciation and acceptance.
Mhm.
And so how do I learn to appreciate and accept my body? And so that was my healing journey around that. And that's where I learned that, so that was the trauma for that.
For this
And
piece. And I want to make a comment. My sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but sounds like you have a good relationship with your parent, your mother at least, was there for you. So a lot of times my students, my viewers will say, oh, well, I didn't have parents that beat me and abused me and belittled me. How can I be having these problems with self-love when they actually did love me? I know, and there's this confusion, right, Jerome? Like, this doesn't make sense. I shouldn't be feeling this because I didn't have it bad like my cousin did, for example. So I don't want to make the assumption, but my sense is you had a loving family.
yeah, so I love that you brought this up because I
Okay,
want to go here because this is
please,
a beautiful topic.
please.
So there was a lot of love in my family, and my parents were present with me. They
Mhm.
loved me, but there's a difference sometimes, and this is something we both work with
Yeah.
our clients. Is not sometimes there's a few things. Sometimes the love that is given is not digestible because it may not come in a way that you need to hear it or
Mhm.
how you actually can receive it. And also, sometimes the love that's given is given a lot in one area, and there's an area that's neglected, not purposely. Like there's not
Yeah.
shame or rejection given, but it's just not present in that area, and so that area gets starved. And you're not taught, and it's not modeled either.
Yes.
so that area gets starved. So that was what was for me. So around body stuff, this is the same thing that I've learned doing this type of work over the years now, is that's very prevalent in men.
Mm.
Because around body image and body love and body acceptance, there's not a lot of belief in the culture beforehand when I was growing up that boys needed that.
Got it.
Right? Where so this is the thing where you get love and where you get fed it early is usually where you get fed it in an area and you get affirmed, you get appreciated, you get accepted. So I will say this portion of love, because there's many facets of love.
Yeah.
One of the facets of love is cherishment.
Mm-hmm.
So where you get cherished in an area when you're growing up is usually an area you won't have a lot of problems in because it's already filled with love.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the places I don't have problems in anywhere, and I've never had any problems across my life in, is around my intellect. Because ever since I was a small kid, I was always praised about how smart I was,
Great.
how intelligent I was.
Yes.
And you can see that area of my life has blossomed over the course of my lifetime because I never had problems around that. But what wasn't given anything, wasn't fed at all or watered at all, was my looks and my body. Instead, what was happening externally with my peers and my environment was I was getting shamed. And there was nowhere else that was balancing that out. And so that was where my trauma came in from there. I also had trauma around my sexuality because I realized I was attracted to the same gender when I was 5. And at the same day I realized I was attracted to the same gender, there was just something in the air. I don't ever remember anybody saying it to me audibly before that time, but it was just something in the energy of the air that this was not okay and this was not going to be okay.
You had an intuitive hit.
Yeah, I just had an intuitive hit that where I am and what all is in my environment, it's just not going to be an okay thing to be. And so from 5, I made this decision that I was going to suppress that.
Yes.
And that was not, and then I heard many messages growing up that confirmed that there's something wrong with you. If this is it, you're sinful, you're not holy, you're not you don't belong, you won't belong, you will be rejected. And so there was another message that made, and so from that space, so I was hiding and suppressing with my looks, and then I began to hide and suppress my sexuality. Right? And then the other aspect as well was when I was in 6th grade, I was moved from public school to private school. And I was one of very few African-American students in this private school. It was really me and my best friend in our graduating class.
Right.
And I never had a teacher that looked like me. I never had another student in a class since that point that looked like me. Even my best friend, he was in my overall class, but we never had the class together.
Right.
And so, and I experienced a lot of racism in that space. There was a lot of racism in that space. And there was a lot of how you may naturally express and what you may naturally want to do doesn't really belong here, and you have to pretend and all of this. So there was some more suppression and the more message of
robot.
You're not enough, right? And how your truth, you can't fully live your truth and be loved at the same time here, and all of that. So my traumas were really about I'm not enough and I'm not safe. And then my truth, if I was to live my truth, I'm really not safe in this world. And so those created this way of being where I hid, I suppressed, I never really was myself. And in hopes that would keep me, safe.
Yeah.
But what I also found that did, which I know you have seen across the board, is when we're not living our truths and we don't allow our true selves to express, what that also will do is you can't live a life that truly nourishes you either.
Mm-hmm.
because you're not being you, and you don't make decisions based upon what will actually allow you to be fed. You make decisions based upon what allow you to be safe.
Because we need to be safe, and
We
that's
need to feel safe.
it's the
Like, that's
bind,
important.
right? It's this double bind.
Yeah, it's this bind. But that thing about it, and this is where I learned where how my illnesses got manifested.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so part of this was, one, the body can't, the self can't be suppressed and be healthy at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, health is directly correlated with expression.
Yeah. There's a starving. The system's being starved of that juice, that nectar,
Yeah.
that delicious stuff that you talk about.
Yeah, it's being starved of your very essence.
Mm-hmm.
And your body needs your essence to
Mm-hmm.
live. And if you're caging a piece of your essence, or trying to cut a piece of your essence away, or pushing a piece of your essence down, you're literally starving yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're also telling yourself again that you're not safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that puts the body in fight or flight.
Of course, those kidneys.
So you're starving yourself.
Yeah.
You're flooding yourself with
Yeah.
with stress hormones.
Yeah.
And that's just not, that's a recipe for illness.
Yes.
And because how this reality works, your life has to be a reflection of your internal state some type of way.
Mm-hmm.
So my body began to manifest the illnesses that were a direct reflection of my internal state. And so HIV and AIDS was a direct reflection of me feeling something was wrong with my body, and my body wasn't desirable.
Yeah.
It was a heightened experience of that.
Yeah.
And kidney failure for me was, this is another piece I need to say before this, that kind of, since we're talking about the manifestation of the disease, I began to feel after college like I was a failure.
Mm.
It was a very strong piece that I hadn't felt before, because when I went to college, I felt my chest was out because I was at Morehouse College, which one was the dream college I wanted to go to.
Okay.
And in the Black community, that's the college to go to. Like, that's the college, right?
Okay.
So my chest, I'm a student at Morehouse College. My chest is out here. And also I'm getting externally affirmed. Like, when I tell somebody I'm at Morehouse College, they're like, oh my God, yes.
There's that.
Yeah, right? So I'm receiving all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I graduate, and then I go into my first professional job, and I go to DC. And so this is really important, because when I'm at DC, and that Morehouse, I'm a graduate of Morehouse, doesn't have as much play anymore, because at DC, they're like, great, now what are you doing?
Yeah.
That was the culture in DC, because it wasn't just, oh, everybody has a degree here.
Sure.
And I'm also the vice president of this embassy, blah, 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 blah. I'm also, like, DC was a heightened level of professionalism.
Pond. Yeah.
Right. It was like the really big stage.
Technically.
And so I was like,
whoa.
And so I didn't have this thing. I had based my worth on
that academic.
Because that was where, because remember, I'm a child that was raised to not feel enough. So the only place I grabbed onto it was this being this Morehouse College student. And so when that was taken away, and I wasn't making, and I had also bought into that very toxic message that was so heavy when I was in college. It's getting better, but it was very heavy around the time when I was in college. Was like, you get the money, you graduate, and you get the big money.
Yeah.
And you get it immediately.
Yeah.
Right? You get it immediately. Yeah. You don't get it. You don't take 5 years to get it. You get it now. Mm-hmm. And so I wasn't living my dreams of being a singer and an actor at that time. I'm doing a job that I liked, but it wasn't making the 6 figures that I thought I should be making right away. As a 23-year-old. And so I started to feel like a failure, and like I had failed, and I started to feel embarrassed, and I started to feel like I had failed my parents, and here I am, and I started to feel stuck. in this
Yeah.
failed life. And again, that energy in the body
Toxic.
is toxic,
Yeah.
right? Because again, what my essence knows is that I'm worthy and I'm lovable, even in this,
Mm-hmm.
and that I am not a failure. Like, I am not a failure. There's not, I am learning, I am growing. And really, if I look back, I was on track. If I would have just, I had a great job that allowed me to leave at 5. I could have gone and sung in the nightclubs and done all of that. So, but that was the messaging that I had gotten as well.
Yeah.
So kidney failure was a representation of a few things. One, where I felt like a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And two, where I had been living a life that drained me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't fulfilling to me.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't nourishing me. It didn't charge me, because dialysis, one thing that dialysis makes you feel like I know to a deep core level what it actually feels like. And I used to always think about this as a kid when I would see, one of my favorite movies was vampire movies.
Okay.
And I'd always want to know, what did it feel like for when a vampire really sucks your blood out? I know to a deep core level, and it feels like your very life is drained out of you.
Yeah.
To a very real level. And so the kidney failure was like a magnification of where I had been feeling like my life had been drained out of me, because that's how I began to feel. I was in this job initially that I loved, but they had changed a few things, and everything that they changed, it had taken away all the aspects of it that I loved. So now it was just a job I was going to do money, and I was feeling stuck, and I was feeling like a failure, and my life was draining. And so this combination of things, this shame, this not feeling enough, this not feeling safe, this feeling like a failure, and this feeling drained, my body could not live off of that.
Mm-mm.
It could not live off of those energies within it.
No.
And so it was checking out.
Yeah.
It was shutting down.
Yeah.
And so that's where I learned. But that was, I said all that because my healing journey was about, okay, how do we shift from feeling like a failure and living a life that drains us to really celebrating our lives and feeling proud of our life, and also living a life that charges us and nourishes us? How do we feel safe and trust in that we're safe in this world, and this world is a safe place to be? And how do I really cherish myself? And that was the big aspects of my journey and my learning experience. But first I had to learn that the reason why I was sick and that I wasn't getting better wasn't because I wasn't drinking enough green juice and eating enough salads and burning enough incense and doing enough sage. It was, baby, we got to heal this internal state.
It's a very energetic, very soul-based piece.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate, sometimes when people hear you were the miracle kid, the miracle person who should have not lived and then did. And I think sometimes there's this thinking, at least it's maybe a generalization or a stereotype, that when a miraculous healing happens, it's like that. And maybe some cases that occurs, I have no doubt. And one of the things I found my students underestimate is the journey of deep healing and real well-being, which is what I think you and I are both really about. It ain't like a dose of antibiotics that you take for 2 weeks and then it's done, or a physical therapy session for a month to recover a broken arm and then the arm is fine. It is a ongoing, lifelong process that never ends. And to see that process as not frightening, but just part of being here and being well. And the layers aren't all going to come off at the exact same time, and they're also not going to add in all at the same time. So when you said it's taken you 15 years, I'm like, that's about the same time it took me. And I'm still learning, and I'm still finding myself, Jesus, that happened again. Like, okay, what do I have to stop? And you have a little tantrum, and then you center and you go, okay, we're still here. Let's figure out what this is supposed to teach me this week. or this.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's one, there are some, and I've met some people who've had the miraculous healings.
Mm-hmm.
I have had some things heal in my journey that have been kind of instantaneous and
Yep.
miraculous as well. Even though my entire journey is miraculous, but I've had things instantaneous. I've seen some things that have healed instantaneously.
Yeah.
But what I want to say with this, is it goes right along with what you're saying, is the journey of healing. I won't say the journey, I'll say the very principle of it. Because if you understand what the actual principle
Yep.
of healing is about, then you can understand this.
Yes.
What I discovered in my journey and in working with people around the world is the principle of healing is about reconnection and restoration.
Love it.
You are reconnecting yourself to your true essence and restoring the truth and the energy of that in the body, in your mind, and in the way you live your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that may not happen tonight.
Yeah.
Right? That depending, like that may not happen tonight. Like that may, if you've been disconnected for yourself for 25 years and 30 years.
More, yeah.
Now it doesn't have to take 25 and 30 years to rebalance it.
No.
Right? But it's just, I think we get so hard on ourselves and we ask so much of ourselves to, just like a broken bone. If you break it today, it's not going to be completely mended in the morning. There are circumstances that I have known. I'm
Sure.
a mystic. I've seen it.
Yep.
I've worked, again, there are, but this is not the usual trajectory of our timeline.
Mm-hmm.
And also because you're healing. So again, when we understand that healing is about restoration and reconnection. Mm-hmm. So and I want to make it very clear what I'm talking about, to your true essence, to yourself.
Yes.
So if you're dealing with a healing in your body, like you're trying to heal something in your body, or actually any healing, if you're trying to heal something in your relationship or your life or your finances or your body, if that was done in the morning, you wouldn't be fully reconnected to yourself, and you're just going to remanifest that thing.
The wiring hasn't been built back in.
It hasn't been built back in yet, and you're just going to redo that thing. Or if it has been, and this is what in the people I've ever worked with that have had these instantaneous, which I call quantum leap healings.
Sure.
Here's what I've noticed. Because this reconnection and this reorienting and this restoration completely shifts how you see everything and how you see the world and how the world operates for you. Mm-hmm. You don't want that to happen overnight, because everything in your life will change, and some things may literally get yanked away. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be really uncomfortable.
And disorienting.
It's going to be really uncomfortable and disorienting. Mm-hmm. And you may not make it out of it.
Mm-hmm. I agree fully with you on that one.
Yeah, so I'm not a big proponent of like, let's get this overnight. I'm saying let's take it at a pace that's comfortable for you, that you can actually integrate. Mm-hmm. So because there are going to be some things that have to be lost.
Yep.
There's going to be some things that are going to dramatically change for you and how you see the world. And you don't want that to come faster than what you can handle. Mm-hmm. You just don't.
You don't. I believe you. I know that personally, because I've done some things a little too fast. And my husband often says, well, perhaps that was supposed to happen so that you could then go back and let people know you do not want to do it this way. It's sort of like I liken to, and it's a total parallel, when someone apparently wins the lottery. I've heard they get all this money and it's gone, like millions and millions and millions of dollars is gone within years. And it's because there hasn't been that process and that work and that foundation of how to deal with that amount of wealth. And
you're not the version of you that can handle that.
Yes. So
you're not the version of you
yeah.
that I want to use handle. You're not the version of you that has a consciousness to live from that in a well space.
Mm-hmm.
And so you get this money. I love that you brought that up because I love talking about this
Yeah.
because you get this money overnight.
Yeah.
This is the quantum leap, right? You
Yeah.
get this money that changes it, changes how you see things, what you see is available to you, but you haven't changed internally and reconnected yourself to an understanding of I am worthy of abundance and prosperity, that I am safe in this world and I can trust this world. And you're still operating off of whatever unhealed trauma created your issues with money in the first place. And then that's just going to replay itself. And now it's just going to be bigger because you have a bigger platform in which to play it out from.
Exactly.
And that's the perfect example of that. It doesn't work out well for the majority of people that have that experience, that haven't done the work around it to integrate themselves into a version of it. And you can, by the way, do some work to integrate yourself to a person who can handle that wealth before that comes. But you've been struggling financially. And then there's even people, not even with the lottery, but people who have gifted people money. They've done this too, where they've just gifted people a large amount of money. And it has really messed them up.
Yeah.
And it's the very thing we're talking about.
Yeah. No, I love it. I feel like we could go on for another 3 hours. And I think I know the other pieces I want to get into, but we'll do that in another one.
Okay.
But specifically around mediumship and your psychic arts.
Yes.
Because that is something I've been dabbling in more, and I've been talking to more people about that. So let's save that.
Okay.
Now, if you're cool with that, because
I'm
like, we're already an hour and 20.
Too.
Actually, as a primer, I will ask you the question: did you ever see the movie The Hereafter with Matt Damon?
I haven't seen that.
Okay, that's your homework before we talk next.
Okay.
But it's a Clint Eastwood film, and it's about near-death experiences and having psychic gifts afterwards and alignment in the world. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie. So I'll link that below for those who want to watch it. And then
please.
Yeah, it's one of the only movies I bought and is on my computer.
Okay. I'm putting it on my list. I'll watch it this weekend.
I would love, I heard you say something in another interview I was listening, and where is that? And I want to end on this. Where is it? Yes, you said this, Jerome. Don't die with your music still in you. Talk to that for our final point of the day. Don't die with your music still in you.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you and for those listening to this, the message?
So I think I originally heard that phrase from Dr. Wayne Dyer.
Okay.
And when I heard it, it described exactly the impetus behind me deciding to survive the first time. Because I felt like I had been given music. And not even as a singer. I'm not even just talking about as a singer. I'm talking about,
I understand.
I had been given music, and this music, it was a unique song, and nobody else had it, and nobody else could play it, and nobody else had even heard it and I had been given the task of playing this for the world. And what I now know also is the world had brought me here because it wanted to hear that. And what I realized on my deathbed the first time was I was going to die with that song never have been played.
Yes.
And even if I had played pieces of it, it was only like the first stanza on the first page.
Got it.
And so what that statement means for me is like, it's a charge to us to be so fully yourself in this lifetime, to be not just your personality and your sexuality and your identity, but all of your truth, and to really follow everything that calls you, so much so that your life feels like it's playing a song. And and to do it knowing that, one, I know what it feels like to lay on your deathbed and realize that you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
It is not a feeling I wish for anybody. It is a terror. And I wish that for nobody. And also, this world of ours is literally a symphony, and you're an instrument, and you have this music to play that adds to the entirety of it. And if you don't play it, that symphony is incomplete. And not only incomplete, but it won't ever be complete, really, without your song. And your song is so beautiful. And it makes living this life worth it when you start to play it. That's the key that makes you feel most alive, and it makes life feel most delicious, is when you really start playing your song. And when that song is out there, life becomes beautiful, it makes sense, and there's a feeling of meaning and fulfillment that is beyond anything that you could have imagined before. But you have to start playing it. And most of us are not playing it. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you. I think that's a good place to end. Beautiful.
Mm.
Thank you